Welcome to a special edition of the MMA Rundown podcast. This will be episode 23. This episode is something I'm just doing right now midweek. Normally what I like to do is I'll do a podcast usually on a Sunday, recapping all the events that happen throughout a week, recapping the fight card, then previewing the next week's fight card. I'll be out of town this weekend, so rather than only doing one podcast and having it late, I'm going to release this one at the same time that I would have released a normal podcast. And then I'll also do my normal weekly podcast that includes the recaps and the previews. But that'll be coming out a little bit later. So for this one, I figured I'd do something fun. And what I would do is go through all the champions that the UFC has right now, and then look at who I think has the best chance at beating them. Now, it's not me making a prediction that that specific fighter is going to beat them. More so than I'm saying I think they probably match up best. Obviously, with the way that the UFC works out, there are a lot of fighters who come and go, fighters who come in. There may be guys who are set to make their debut right now, who in a couple of years' time might be the one to knock off a current champion. We saw that just happen at middleweight with Israel Adesanya. It took him about a year and a half to go from a guy who wasn't even in the UFC to being a guy who fought against Robert Whittaker and was able to knock him off and win the title. That's not exactly normal, but that's something that can happen. So for the most part, the fighters who I'm going to be looking at in a given division are going to be guys who are already ranked. And it's not always the case that guys who are ranked today are going to be the ones who end up knocking off the champion. There may be someone else who is further down the line who can make their way up and cause some issues. So I'll start off with flyweight, and I guess in turn bantamweight as well, because Henry Cejudo has both of those belts. So what I'm going to do is, for each fighter, I'll look at what their strengths are, talk about some fighters who I think may be able to beat them at their strengths, talk about their weaknesses, and then talk about some fighters who I think could exploit those weaknesses, and then go from there. So for Henry Cejudo, his strengths, obviously, as an Olympic gold medalist, as he'll tell you about over and over, which I'm perfectly fine with because it's kind of funny in a way, his wrestling is it's excellent, although it is worth noting that Henry never went to college for wrestling. He wrestled in high school, wrestled freestyle. I guess when you're wrestling in high school too, you'll wrestle some folk. But then went to the Olympics as a freestyle wrestler. Now the difference between freestyle and folk style is that in freestyle wrestling, when you take a guy down, you have a little bit of time where you can kind of spin him around, hit like a gut wrench or a leg lace to get some back exposure. But in folk style, when you take someone down, if you can hold them down for the rest of the period, they'll let you, and you can score points from there. So for that reason, we've seen a lot more success from folk style wrestlers in MMA than we have from freestyle wrestlers. It's part of the reason why when you look at where the U.S. tends to finish internationally in wrestling, we're generally around, usually about even with Iran, but then behind Russia and sometimes behind some other wrestlers from countries out in that part of the world. Yet when you look at a lot of the wrestlers who have become champions who have really made it to the top of the UFC, a lot of those guys are American wrestlers. Part of the reason is because the the UFC is an American company, and when you look at the cost of travel visas relative to the 10 and 10 basic contract for a fighter, oftentimes there are going to be more opportunities granted to American fighters because you're not having to pay for the visas for them. Whereas if the UFC is only going to be in Russia once a year and sometimes not even that much, it doesn't always make as much sense to sign those guys. So yes, there are some more opportunities, but part of that also comes down to the fact that folk style wrestling is much bigger in America than it is anywhere else in the world, and folk style wrestling really encourages fighters to be able to control on the ground, or it controls the wrestlers, or it encourages wrestlers to be able to control from the ground. So it is worth mentioning that while Cejudo did have some exposure to folk style, most of his success comes in freestyle, where control on the ground isn't as important. And from what we've seen in his MMA career to this point, it's not as though once he gets a fighter to the ground that he's able to just keep him there and just dominate, land a bunch of huge shots, and even be able to pass guard or do anything else off of that. A lot of times he'll take someone down, he'll kind of stall him out there, throw enough strikes to stay active and not get stood up. But even sometimes some refs probably would be wise to stand him up. We looked at that fight against DJ where he won the title. I believe it was in the second round where he took him down and then just like basically hugged him from top of half guard for the rest of the round, was able to end up on top. It really didn't do any damage. So while he has the ability to take you down, and while he has the ability to kind of stall from top and essentially win around there, it's not as though once he takes you down, you're in big trouble. It's more so just like once he takes you down, you're at risk of losing a round, so you don't want him to do that because it's never a good idea to get behind on rounds against a guy like him. He's also pretty good in terms of landing big shots with the boxing. He's more of a boxer than kickboxer. Now he does have that style where he had like that karate stance where he kind of jets in and out. I actually like that stance a lot. That's something I've tried to copy myself when I train, where as you can kind of like dart in and out, you can use it to disguise takedowns and also use it to disguise punches. So if you get someone worried about the takedowns, then you can kind of come in really quick and land a huge shot over the top. If they start getting worried about the takedown, or if they start worrying about the shot over the top, then you can use a feint there, make them think that you're going to throw a punch, and then come on in and take them down. So he's able to use that. fairly strong from the clinch. That wasn't exactly a strength for him back when he was fighting against Mighty Mouse the first time. That was obviously what it cost him. But he seems to have improved in that. He seems to have improved in that area. But for him, he's got good power. He's got decent technical boxing. He's very good at mixing up the striking and the wrestling, at least to an extent where if you're fighting him, you have to be worried about the wrestling at all times. And one of the things that we learned from that Conor McGregor versus Khabib Nurmagomedov fight is that in MMA, it's not always about who the best striker is. It's about who's able to be the best striker in MMA. And in MMA, there is that threat of a takedown that there isn't in a striking match. And by having the threat of the takedown on your side, it can make your striking a lot more effective. And Henry's got pretty good boxing as it is, but being able to offer that threat of the takedown really makes it a whole lot more effective for him, and that's part of the reason why he is where he is. He did have that one over Mighty Mouse Johnson. I don't think he won that fight. I actually scored it for Mighty Mouse, but it was a close fight either way. But then in his fight with TJ Dillashaw, he was able to land a huge shot, darting in. Against Marlon Moraes, he had a rough first round, but then was able to just put the pressure on. Did some work from the clinch, but was also able to just stay on him, use his boxing, mixing some takedown attempts, and eventually he was able to wear Moraes out and get the win there. So as far as flyweight goes, the division sort of got thrown away and then brought back. So right now, if you're in the division, you're probably in the top 15 at this point. Is there anyone in the top 15 that I think matches up well with him? I guess the obvious answer would be Joseph Benavidez, because Benavidez has a win over him. I think the Benavidez that we have today is not as good as the Benavidez that we had back then. And I think the Henry Cejudo we have today is better than the Henry Cejudo we had back then. And there's also an argument to be made that Henry won that fight in the first place, and it wasn't a good decision. So I wouldn't pick Benavidez to win this fight. But with Benavidez, he's a very good scrambler, so he's a guy where he doesn't have to worry as much about getting taken down as other guys, because if you do take him down, he's tough to hold down. He's good at scrambling out. He's also got pretty good boxing on his. He's got good boxing in his own right. Can definitely land some good shots. So I think in terms of the division as it goes, he's probably got the best matchup. But if you look at some of the other guys there, you got Jussier Formiga, who has excellent jiu-jitsu, but I don't see him being able to take down Henry Cejudo or having any success there. You have Davison Figueiredo, who likes to throw a lot of heavy shots from the feet, has the jiu-jitsu, but I don't know that he'd be very effective against Henry Cejudo with his jiu-jitsu. I think for him, he would just have to hope to land something big on Henry, and I wouldn't count on that happening. You have Pantoja, who in some ways is similar to Figueiredo. They actually had a fight that Figueiredo won. So a lot of the same things I said about Figueiredo would sort of apply there with Pantoja. Sergio Pettis, that fight's already happened, and Pettis was one of the guys that Cejudo actually was able to take down and did about as much work as we've seen him do. Granted, it's not like he ever had Pettis rocked or he was getting close to passing Pettis' guard, but he was able to control from top. Tim Elliott would be an interesting matchup if it gets into grappling exchanges, just because Tim Elliott's got a lot of good chokes that he has, and he's a good enough wrestler where you're not just going to shoot right through him. He's going to make you have to work to your second and third attack. And while you're adjusting from a wrestling standpoint, he's adjusting from a grappling standpoint, looking for new chokes. And he was pretty close to getting Mighty Mouse, so maybe there's a chance that he, rather than like the puncher's chance, he has like a strangler's chance. I don't know if that's what you'd want to call it. Then you have Brandon Moreno. That fight probably isn't ever going to happen because those two are pretty close. And then Roger Bontorin, Kai Kara-France, Matt Schnell, Jordan Espinoza, Alex Perez, Askar Askarov, Ryan Benoit, and Mark Del Rosa. I don't know that any of them match up particularly well. So I think at this point, if Henry Cejudo is going to continue fighting at flyweight, I don't know that there's anyone in the division that's going to beat him. The thing for him, though, is that he always had a tough time making flyweight. He seemed very happy to have to cut 10 fewer pounds to go up to bantamweight. I don't know if he has any desire to go back down to flyweight. He may go back down one or two more times, but I don't think that's a place he wants to hang around that long. So if Henry Cejudo loses that flyweight title, maybe by his own choice rather than by another flyweight beating him. As far as bantamweight goes, this is where it gets interesting, because I think from a style matchup, if you're looking at it on paper, a guy like Marlon Moraes presents a lot of problems for him. A guy like TJ Dillashaw presents a lot of problems for him. Dillashaw's a guy who's tough to take down, a guy who's got very good striking, a guy who's got plenty of power. But we saw that fight went at flyweight. Now, if they fought again, do I think it would go the same way where it ends really quickly? I don't know about that. I think Dillashaw can definitely put up a much better performance than we saw. But it's hard to pick him again after the way the first fight went. Then you look at Marlon Moraes, absolutely dominated the first round. So we had that image in our mind of him just completely outstriking Cejudo, lighting him up with leg kicks, which is one of those things where Cejudo having that wide stance, it does open him up to those leg kicks. And he really had to pay for it early, but he found a way to fight back. Now, granted, he did have that ankle injury going in too, which didn't help either, but I guess at this point, after having that first fight, yes, we did see Marlon Moraes absolutely dominate Cejudo for a round, but Cejudo made his adjustments and went from there. Cejudo knows what those adjustments are, so if they have a rematch, you'd think he probably comes out a little bit stronger than he did the last time, and is the time away going to be enough for Marlon Moraes to make his own adjustments and be able to get back on top? I don't know about that. So it's hard for me to pick Marlon against him. Aljamain Sterling, he's very good in the grappling, but I I don't see him taking Henry Cejudo down. So if it ends up being a striking match between Cejudo and Aljo, yes, there's a chance that if Cejudo wants to mix in the wrestling to make his striking more effective, that he could potentially get caught in a choke. I wouldn't expect that to happen, though. It's a possibility, but it's not something that I would count on having happen. But then on the feet, Aljo's good at striking from distance, but I just see Henry being able to get inside and be effective to outpoint him. If he doesn't finish him, at least be able to outpoint him. Peter Yan is very interesting to me, though, because Yan is one of those guys who's tough to take down, has pretty good wrestling himself, and is also, if you do get his butt on the mat, he's very good at getting back up, so in that way he's a good scrambler. So what Cejudo would have to do in order to make the wrestling a real concern for Peter Yan is he'd have to be able to get him down and be able to hold him down for an extended period of time where at the very least Yan's worried about losing a round, if not worried about taking damage on the ground. I think there's a possibility that though Cejudo may be able to take him down, he might not be able to take him down at will. And on top of not being able to take him down at will, he might not be able to do a whole lot from top. And if that's the case, and Yan isn't just completely worried about every possible shot that Cejudo could take, then the boxing definitely goes in Peter Yan's favor, and in that way the matchup would go in his favor. So to me, Peter Yan is a very difficult matchup for Henry Cejudo, and I think if we had to pick one guy in the top, that there's a good case to be made that Yan's the guy. Just looking at the rest of the top 15, though, Rafael Sunsao, I don't see him being very effective here. I think Cejudo just keeps his fight standing and beats him on the feet. Pedro Munoz would be an interesting one. Munoz throws a lot of wild strikes as a brutal guillotine, so if you're Cejudo, you're not going to want to shoot on Munoz at all. So if you're going to look for takedowns, you're going to have to try to find ways where your head is just constantly in a safe position. Munoz has some good hands, but to me, I feel like while this is a tougher matchup than I think a lot of people realize for Cejudo, I still would probably give the edge to Cejudo. Dominic Cruz, if he can stay healthy, that's one thing. So Cruz is another guy who's pretty tough to take down and hold down, and especially with his footwork, he's good at cutting angles and he's tough to cut an angle on. So that could cause some issues for Cejudo. But again, he has to stay healthy, but that could potentially be another another difficult matchup for him. In that Cejudo, if he has trouble taking down Cruz or trouble offering the threat of a takedown, I could see Cruz being able to outstrike him. Jimmy Rivera, don't see a whole lot there to believe that he's going to have a chance there. Cody Garbrandt, he's got a puncher's chance, but I would expect Cejudo to knock Garbrandt out if that fight were to happen. Cody Stamann, don't really know. Rob Font, John Dotson, Song Yudong. Yudong, I'm not quite sold on Song Yudong yet. I think he might be a guy who tops out like between like the 6 to 10 range. But right now he's on the rise, so we'll have to see where he goes from here. Uriah Faber, I don't expect to beat Cejudo, and then Thomas Almeida has had a lot of problems with his chin, so I'd imagine he would get knocked out by Henry Cejudo. So finally we can talk about a new champion, or a different champion I should say, and that would be Max Holloway at featherweight. Holloway has a recent loss to Dustin Poirier, although Poirier recently tweeted that he has no desire to ever go down to 145 again, so Poirier is not on the list of people who could potentially cause issues for him. He also has a loss to Conor McGregor before his big win streak. I don't see Conor ever coming back down again. That being said, the lessons that we can learn from those losses, what I find with Max Holloway is that he tends to be a relatively slow starter. He's very good about reading his opponents, and then as he gets a read on you on the feet, he just really starts to open up and just take over from there. So if you're a fighter who can either start fast and make him pay in the early rounds, or if you can find a way to disrupt his ability to make reads on you, that's where you'll be successful. Dustin was able to disrupt that by rocking him early in the first round. Constantly had Max on his toes where he wasn't in a point where he was in control of the fight and control the pace of the fight. So it made it difficult for him to get his reads and be able to take over the fight from there. And then Conor McGregor, you could tell in the striking every round that passed by that Max was making up the advantage there, but Conor was able to take him down and really break that apart as well. So if you're looking at a guy who's going to give Max Holloway problems, it's either going to be a guy who can rock him on the feet early, or it's going to be a guy who can take him down or at least offer enough of a threat of a takedown where it slows down his ability to get a read on you. And in the time that he's still working on getting a read on you, you're able to win some rounds, at least some of the early rounds, and possibly build up enough of a lead where you can hang on. So if you look at who the number one contender is right now, that's Alex Volkanovski. Volkanovski potentially could fit both of those, in that he's got enough power on his feet where he could potentially stun Max early, and really make it difficult for Max to get a read on him. Also has decent takedowns. It's not as though he has like a great wrestling background, but at least in MMA he's very effective with his takedowns. So you'd figure that maybe if he wants to employ that strategy, if he's able to actually close the distance, and he has very long arms, that he may be able to do that. Alex is just one of those guys, and there are a few guys in the UFC right now that have like made it towards the top. Colby and Usman are other guys like this, where when you watch them, you're like, yeah, they're good, but I don't know that they're that good. But then you just keep watching them fight, and they just keep winning. So even though they don't have the flashiest styles, like the most, it's not as though you're like amazed by like technical brilliance when you're watching them, but they're just incredibly effective. And I feel like with Alexander Volkanovski, he's one of those guys where after that win against Aldo, you can't question his effectiveness anymore. Um, and for that reason, it's hard to say whether or not he'll be effective against Max Holloway too. There's definitely reason to believe that he could be. But with that being said, I feel like I need to like see more of him and understand more of him before I could say that I think he's going to be the right guy to knock off Max Holloway. It wouldn't be the craziest thing ever if he is. It wouldn't be the craziest thing ever if he drops him, if he rocks him early and is able to control the fight from there. But I feel like I don't know enough about his game to know whether or not he can sustain dominance against Max Holloway over the course of 5 rounds. Number 2 is Brian Ortega. We already saw that fight. Ortega, a lot of people know him for his jiu-jitsu, but a lot of his jiu-jitsu tends to come more as like a defensive response. So even if you look at a fight like Cub Swanson, or if you look at Renato Moicano, like these are great submissions, but it's not as though he like shot in on these guys, took them down, and then submitted them. It was more so them shooting on him or them engaging in grappling exchanges with him and then him countering them. And as a result, Ortega was in a position against Max Holloway where he actually had to start those grappling engagements. Had a quick takedown on Max, but Max sprung right back up. But for the most part, Max didn't engage in any grappling with him, and for that reason, it just became a striking match between Ortega, who's not a bad striker, against Holloway, who's a much better striker, and that did not go Ortega's way at all. Jose Aldo, we've seen lose to Max Holloway twice, no reason to believe that he's going to beat him now. Frankie Edgar, we just saw lose to Max Holloway. Edgar had there was that possibility with Edgar where he could potentially disrupt Max Holloway with the takedowns, but it was surprising to see Edgar, when he'd shoot in, if the first attempt would get stuffed, he'd just kind of back off and not go for a second attempt or not try to wrestle through or chain wrestle. And that really cost him his take. I don't know if he got a single takedown in that fight. I think he actually got one at the end of the 3rd round, but for the most part, were very unsuccessful with takedowns. Then we have Zabit Magomedsharipov, who you would expect to have a pretty good takedown game, have the ability to at least take Max down, and if he does take Max down, then obviously that can disrupt him and disrupt Max's ability to get a read on him. That being said, Zabit's biggest issue right now, or the biggest hole in his game from what I see, is his boxing. Tends to leave a lot of openings there, and that's where Max is very strong. So if Max can keep the range and can keep Zabit from taking him down, I can see Max just boxing him up. He's also got great cardio, so Zabit's shown in some past 3-round fights that he tends to tire towards the end of those fights. If he's in a 5-round fight, I don't know that he's going to finish Max. So if it goes into the later rounds, that could be an issue for him too. So I would actually pick Max over Zabit. Zhang, I mean, he's dangerous. He's got good boxing. He's good pretty much everywhere. But I would see this fight mostly playing out in the standing, and I would see Max Holloway being able to win from there. Yair Rodriguez, in some ways similar to Zabit. Not as good of wrestling though, not as good of a grappler as Zabit. Yes, he throws some unorthodox kicks, but I would just see Max boxing him up as well. Jeremy Stevens, Max has already beaten Renato Moicano. I don't believe Max has fought him yet, but I'd probably give him the edge there as well. Josh Emmett has a lot of power, but I would figure that Max would probably be able to keep range from there. And then the rest of the top 15 goes Calvin Kattar, who actually could be a difficult one because Calvin's got excellent boxing, and I don't see Max trying to take Calvin down. So if you have a boxing match between Calvin Kattar and Max Holloway, Kattar could definitely land some good shots early and at least do enough to sort of slow down Max's process. And to be honest, that actually, now that I look at his name, there is a decent case to be made that number 11 Calvin Kattar might offer the toughest test for Max Holloway in the division. But then we have Shane Burgos, Mirsad Bektic, Ryan Hall, and Arnold Allen. Ryan Hall could offer some problems on the ground, but we saw how Max was able to avoid a lot of the grappling exchanges with Brian Ortega. I'd imagine he'd be effective in avoiding grappling exchanges with Ryan Hall too. So yeah, it's possible that Hall could spin underneath him, catch a quick heel hook, and get him, but I'd have to take Holloway in that fight. So to me, it'd be between Alex Volkanovski and Calvin Kattar as being the guys who would offer the biggest threat to Max Holloway. And I feel like I know more about Kattar than I do about Volkanovski, which is sort of weird to say. And for that reason, I'll say Kattar, but don't be terribly surprised if Volkanovski puts up a good fight and maybe even gets the W against Holloway on December 14th. Moving on to lightweight, Khabib Nurmagomedov is the champion. Khabib is excellent at wrestling against the fence. He is excellent at passing guard and mixing in guard passes with ground and pound and heavy ground and pound at that. Very good at getting into dominant positions. He could be better about finishing once he gets to dominant positions, but he's still excellent at getting to them. So if you're looking at his strengths, obviously it's wrestling up against the fence, and then it's his top game. To him, it's more of like a combat sambo top game. You can call it a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu top game, whatever you want to call it. But it's wrestling and grappling for him. A lot of people mistake him as just a wrestler. If you're looking at MMA as being a sport with three disciplines where you have striking, wrestling, and grappling, Khabib Nurmagomedov is excellent at not just wrestling but also grappling, and I think a lot of people miss that. They just look at Khabib as just the wrestler. He also has excellent grappling, and that's why he's been so successful. So for him, his striking is just serviceable enough where he's able to keep people on their toes. He's able to keep himself defended, but he's also able to do enough to close the distance and end up getting in on shots against a lot of guys. And the threat of the takedown oftentimes makes other fighters a little. Their striking tends to drop a level because they're trying to be prepared for that takedown attempt. Obviously, like I mentioned before, that Conor McGregor situation where he got dropped by a right hand because he was worried about Khabib ducking and going for a takedown. So that can happen. So if you're looking at guys who can give Khabib problems, with him being a fantastic wrestler and a fantastic grappler, if you have someone who is a better wrestler than him who can keep him from putting them on their back, or even better yet, being able to put Khabib on his back, that would definitely be an issue. Is there anyone in the division who could potentially do that? People might say Tony Ferguson. I don't think Tony's going to take him down. I don't even think that Tony would be able to defend most takedowns, or defend a majority of the takedowns. But he is a guy who's pretty tough to keep down. That being said, if you do get him down, he's also got great cardio. So while other fighters tend to wear out after a couple of rounds, I don't think Tony would ever really wear out in a 25-minute fight. So that could be an issue. People also look at Justin Gaethje being a former D1 All-American. So he could potentially be a guy who's hard to take down and hard to keep down because, again, as a D1 All-American, that means he's wrestling folk style. So he's in folk style, you learn the skills of not only holding a guy down, but also being able to get up and keep someone from holding you down. So that's an area where Gaethje could potentially cause some issues. And then you have Gregor Gillespie, who is a multiple-time Division I All-American himself. And he'd be another guy where I figure if him and Khabib fight, that he's going to try to do to Khabib what Khabib does to others, and he's going to try to take Khabib down. Do I think he's going to be successful in taking Khabib down? I don't know about that. I think Gregor is a better rider than he, at least in terms of why he was successful in Division I. I think a lot of it had to do with his mat wrestling more so than his standing wrestling and his ability to take guys down. Not that he's got bad takedowns. Obviously, he's got very good takedowns. But Khabib has high-level wrestling himself, and I don't know that Gregor is going to be able to take him down over and over and over again. But Gregor may be able to take him down once or twice and control a round from there. And even if he doesn't take him down, he's going to be a guy where Khabib's going to have trouble taking him down. If Khabib does take him down, you would figure that Gregor would be able to get back up relatively quickly. So looking at the guys in the top 15, Tony Ferguson's the first one that pops up. To me, Ferguson has the skill set to beat him. My concern with Ferguson is that there may be a bit of an ego play here that could be an issue. If I'm fighting, or if I'm trying to coach someone up to fight against Khabib Nurmagomedov, what I would tell them is if you get taken down, you should try to work your way back to your feet rather than to try to win the fight from your guard. And with Tony being under Eddie Bravo, with him being an Eddie Bravo black belt, you know for a fact that Eddie Bravo is going to be in his corner, and Eddie Bravo would like nothing more than to have his student, one of his black belts, be the first guy to beat Khabib, and not just beat him, but beat him on the ground, and beat him on the ground with a submission, particularly if it comes from rubber guard. Like, we think about what happened when Eddie Bravo first got on the scene when he beat Royler Gracie, and how that really just exploded his brand. Then he beat Royler again at Metamorphosis, and that really did a lot for him. We saw the EBI tournaments, that was doing a lot for him. The effect a moment like Tony Ferguson using a rubber guard to submit Khabib Nurmagomedov could have for 10th Planet would be gigantic. And I think for that reason, if Tony gets taken down, and I think he will, he's going to look to submit him off his back, and I don't think that's the best idea. But if Tony decides that if he gets taken down, he's going to try to build his way back up and sort of treat it more like a folk-style wrestling match than like a jiu-jitsu match, I think he'll be able to get up and get away enough where in the later rounds, if nothing else, Khabib's going to be tired, and at that point, Tony can really put it on him, and if not finish him, win some 10-8 rounds and potentially even steal a fight from there. So to me, Tony's got the skills to do it. I just don't know if he is going to adhere to the tactics that are required to do so. So I'm concerned for him there, but there definitely is the possibility for him to get the win. Dustin Poirier, we just saw fight Khabib Nurmagomedov. Had a couple moments, got close on a guillotine. Had him stunned in the second round, but for the most part, didn't have the grappling to deal with Khabib. Conor McGregor, the one round he won in the third round, it seemed as though Khabib was sort of taking it off and just getting his breath back. And in the meanwhile, Conor seemed to be gassing himself out as well. And it looked as though in the fourth round, once he had gotten taken down and once he was underneath Khabib's mount, that he was just down there and ready to give up his back and get tapped out. Kind of funny for Conor that he's got his own strength and conditioning program called McGregor Fast, yet he always seems to have conditioning problems in his fight. So if you tend to buy into McGregor Fast, or if you paid for a subscription, whatever they charge for there, maybe not the best use of your money. Justin Gaethje, as I mentioned, going to be difficult to take down. If this fight does stay on the feet, I would give him the edge. So to me, the question would be, how effective is Justin Gaethje's wrestling right now? How much has he been training it? We know there's something there, obviously, because he was a Division I All-American, but we haven't really seen it in a fight setting so much. So there'd be a lot to learn there. I think as a D1 All-American, there can definitely be the skill set there to keep Khabib off him, or to be able to get Khabib off him if he gets taken down. But that's hard to say. I know Khabib trains with a lot of other D1 All-Americans, guys like Kyle Crutchmer. I don't know exactly how those matchups go in the gym. But he does train with better wrestlers than Justin Gaethje, and at least from what it sounds like, he does pretty well with them in the gym. So if that's the case, then I don't know that Gaethje would have enough wrestling skill to really be able to negate Khabib. But there's definitely a question mark there, and until we see Justin Gaethje fight someone who's trying to wrestle him, I don't know that we're ever going to know the answer until he fights a guy like Khabib. Then Donald Cerrone, I just see him getting taken down and beaten up on the ground. Paul Felder, same thing. Dan Hooker, same thing, although Hooker's got a pretty good guillotine, so there'd be the risk there if Khabib, if Poirier was able to get close on one. Maybe Hooker catches a guillotine, but more likely than not he doesn't, and at that point he's in big trouble. Al Iaquinta, we've already seen that fight. Edson Barboza, we've already seen that fight. Kevin Lee, we're going to learn a lot more about how he would match up against Khabib after this fight with Gregor Gillespie, so there's going to be a lot to learn from there. Then Gregor Gillespie. Gregor is a guy where I don't know quite enough about his striking yet, because his striking is very well designed to fit into his game plan. So he's good about throwing ones and twos and throwing an overhand and mixing up the overhand with a shot. So his striking is very effective for a high-level wrestler who wants to take the fight to the ground, which happens to be him, and it happens to work out really well for him. If he gets put in with another high-level wrestler who he's not going to be able to take down at will, how's his striking going to change? I think from there, there's a lot to learn. Is it possible he has better striking than Khabib if the two end up just in a stand-up fight for 5 rounds? Maybe, but I feel like I haven't seen enough to know that yet, and that's not a fault of Gregor. Gregor's doing exactly what he has to do to be successful in the fights that he's in. So I don't fault him for that. It's just one of those things where I feel like I don't know enough to know how that would go. But there's definitely reason to believe that Gregor would be as tough a matchup as anyone for Khabib Nurmagomedov, assuming Tony Ferguson plans to play rubber guard and fight off his back if he gets taken down. Then we have Anthony Pettis. He'd probably get taken down and beat up. Charles Oliveira, very good guard, very good guillotines. But we've seen him fight against other submission-savvy wrestlers like Frankie Edgar. Edgar was able to take him down and beat him up without having to be terribly concerned about what happened on the ground. So while Oliveira is a great submission threat, I don't know that I see him catching Khabib Nurmagomedov. Still an interesting fight, though. Alexander Hernandez, don't really see him doing a whole lot to deal with Khabib. And then Islam Makhachev is never going to fight Khabib, because those two are incredibly close and very good friends. At welterweight, we have Kamaru Usman as the champion. Usman's a guy who I feel like I just don't feel like I know enough about him yet, because to me, before he had that fight with Woodley, it felt pretty obvious to me that Woodley was the better boxer. It felt obvious to me that Woodley was the better wrestler, and so I felt as though Woodley should win that fight handily, and Woodley didn't outstrike him on the feet. He got out-wrestled up against the fence, and on top of that, once the fight went to the ground, I mean, Woodley at the time was a black belt, and Usman was a brown belt at the time. Usman was able to advance to some dominant positions on the ground, even had him mounted at a point. So Usman's now a black belt, and it's just like everyone he fights, he pressures up against the fence. He's able to mix up his strikes, throwing some wild punches here and there, but then also throwing it straight down the middle, forcing the guy's hands up, and then shooting underneath and taking him down. Again, if I had to drop the kind of fighter who I think would be the worst matchup for him, it would be Tyron Woodley, and we just saw that fight, and it didn't go well for Woodley. So who do you pick from here? Well, number one,
the number one ranked guy right now is actually Tyron Woodley, not Colby Covington, which is sort of odd, but I guess Colby never beat Tyron, and Tyron's only lost it to the champion, so you can make a case there. But for Tyron, on paper, you would think it's a good matchup. He says he just wasn't on that night. Maybe that's the case. Maybe it's also the case that Tyron tends to like to back himself up against the fence and look for a big shot, and maybe backing yourself up against the fence against a guy like Kamaru Usman's a terrible idea, and for that reason, the fight went the way it did. I think for that reason, you probably still have to say that Kamaru wins that rematch, even though I think on paper it's still a tough matchup for him. Colby Covington's interesting because Colby's another guy where he tends to do a good job of pressuring guys up against the fence, take them down, control them. His control probably isn't quite as good as Kamaru's, but he's still very active, keeps a very high pace. His striking's a little more diverse than Kamaru's is, though. But he's a guy where before that fight against Robbie Lawler, I didn't think he was as good as he was. And then he goes on and takes down Robbie Lawler relatively at will. And Lawler's not a guy who's easy to take down at all. It's very difficult to take down, very difficult to hold down, too. I mean, we saw guys like Johnny Hendricks, who had better wrestling credentials than Colby Covington, have a much harder time with Robbie Lawler. Granted, that was in the past, but even still, grappling doesn't tend to deteriorate quite as fast as striking does. So Colby could be a guy where I feel like I don't quite yet know how good he is. I feel like I don't quite yet know how good Kamaru is. Who's better right now? I can't wait to find out. I'm really interested in seeing that fight in December. But I guess you could definitely make the case that Colby could potentially beat Kamaru at his own game, but you could also make the case that Kamaru beats Colby at his own game. But there is the case to be made that Colby could beat Kamaru at his own game there. Then we have Jorge Masvidal at 3. Masvidal's a tough guy to hold down and dominate. He did get beaten in that way by Damian Maia. Granted, towards the end of the fight, Maia tended to gas out, but Maia is not exactly known to have the best gas tank. Kamaru is known for keeping a pace on, so you'd figure that Kamaru could take down Jorge Masvidal, hold him down, and at least win 3 rounds, and that'd be enough for him to get the win over Masvidal, so I pick him there. Leon Edwards, he already fought and beat. Rafael Dos Anjos, he already fought and beat. Nate Diaz, we've seen taken down and beaten up by guys like Rafael Dos Anjos, so I would not pick him in that match. Santiago Ponzinibbio, he's got a puncher's chance, I guess, but I wouldn't. I just wouldn't pick him to win that fight. Stephen Thompson is an interesting one in that he's going to be a tough guy to corner. Now, Thompson has had some issues, and it goes even before the fight against Pettis, but he was having issues for a while where after all the kickboxing fights he had, his chin seemed to be deteriorating a bit. Got rocked in a lot of fights, obviously got rocked in those Woodley fights. Got rocked against Darren Till, got rocked against, or just got knocked straight out against Anthony Pettis, so the chin isn't quite there. But with that being said, he's a tough guy to corner. So for Usman to employ his wrestling, it's going to be difficult for him to get Thompson in a position where he can actually take him down. And in the meantime, you'd have to think Wonderboy's going to be able to land a lot of good shots. So then the question becomes, how good is Kamaru striking? Can he adjust to it and land a big shot and take over from there? I think there's an argument to be made that Wonderboy would actually be a very bad matchup for Usman. But my worry with him is that he doesn't have the best chin, and Usman's probably going to land a handful of shots at least. And if he lands one that puts him down, what's that going to do from there? Is Kamaru going to be able to finish him on the ground? If not, is he going to be able to do enough damage where it just it has a massive fight-altering effect? That's definitely possible. Then we have Darren Till at number 9, although he's a middleweight right now, so I won't count him in there. Damian Maia at 10. That fight already happened. Maia sort of had his back in the first round. There was controversy around Damian Maia getting pulled off of him. But with that being said, even if the ref let him hang on there, the way that he was wedged against the fence, it's not like he was ever that close to getting it finished. So while you can make the argument that Damian Maia should have never been taken off of Kamaru Usman's back, I would also make the argument that Kamaru Usman survives that first round regardless, and then goes on to win the fight. So would not pick Damian Maia there. Ben Askren, good wrestler, but striking just never really has been there for him. Excellent folk style wrestling, and like I mentioned with Khabib isn't just a great wrestler, he's also a very good grappler. Askren is a very good grappler as well, but that lack of striking really, it's been a big issue for him, and I think a guy like Usman, who wouldn't be the easiest guy to take down or hold down, that could be a tough matchup for Askren. So yes, there's a path to victory for Askren, but I wouldn't say that he's exactly the toughest matchup for me either. Then we have Anthony Pettis, a guy who's been taken down and held down and beaten up before. Robbie Lawler, we saw what happened to him against Colby. Kamaru's a similar fighter, plus they're training partners, so that fight isn't going to happen. Vicente Luque. Don't know if I can think of anyone who's taken Vicente down and held him down and beaten him up. dangerous on the feet, so you figure if the fight stays standing, he'd have an edge there. I think they may be training partners as well, but if we're just talking about it from a matchup standpoint, striking could potentially go Luque's way. Luque's got some good dart strokes on the ground too, but I'd have to lean Usman's way on that, and then Gilbert Burns, who I'm pretty sure is also a training partner of Kamaru Usman. Burns excellent on the ground, but I don't see him being able to take Usman down. So from there, does Usman want to take down the former Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world champion? I think there's a good question to be asked there. If he doesn't, there's a chance that Burns may be able to outstrike him on the feet. But if he does, Burns was known more for his top game than his bottom game, so it's possible that Usman could take him down and then just sort of stall from top and just be active enough to win rounds. It's not like he would dominate him on the ground, but he may be able to do enough where he can steal the rounds. And given the fact that MMA is based around 5-minute rounds, you can take down a guy who's got better jiu-jitsu than you, and if you can survive, that'll work in your favor. Whereas if it was a no time limit fight, it would be a terrible idea to take a guy like Gilbert down. So if we're picking guys who I think are the toughest matchups for Usman, I'd say it's either Colby, if Colby's able to beat him at his own game, or it'd be Wonderboy if Wonderboy can keep from getting any big shots landed on him. So those would be the two that I would look at 170. At 185, we have the newly minted Israel Adesanya. Adesanya, I think of anyone on this list, has the most obvious holes in his game. But with that being said, I think he deserves a lot of respect too. So with Israel Adesanya, what's really special about him compared to a lot of other people who entered the sport after being very good in another is oftentimes if you have someone who's a great striker or someone who's a great grappler, they decide coming in that they're going to do what's best in the short term, and what's best in the short term is finding ways to win fights which you're already good at. What Israel Adesanya did is he's like, yes, I'm an excellent striker, but I'm not going to look at grappling as an area just to avoid in general and just learn takedown defense. I'm also going to learn how to attack off my back. I'm going to learn submissions. I'm going to learn jiu-jitsu. And he has picked up jiu-jitsu very quick. He's gotten very good at it. He showed some really good flashes in the fight against, I'm trying to think, it was Brad Tavares. We obviously remember the fight against Kelvin Gastelum where he's close to submitting him, or at least close to slapping on a good triangle choke. So that area of his game is improving a lot. And in time, an area that is oftentimes a weakness for strikers could eventually become a strength for him, but it's not quite there yet. Same goes with his wrestling. Takedown defense is very good, but there's definitely room for improvement there as well. So if you're looking at the fighter that he is right now, there are fighters who can definitely expose him in the wrestling and grappling areas. So for him, the worst kind of matchup is going to be a guy who can at least hang in there striking, be able to close the distance, be able to take him down, and then once they take him down, be able to dominate from there. So if we're looking at the rankings right now, number 1 is Robert Whittaker. Just saw that fight. Israel was able to get the win there. Paulo Costa, I would think for the most part, this is going to be a striking match. Now, Costa hits extremely hard. We have seen Adesanya get rocked a couple times in his past couple fights, and Costa's a guy who you figure if he finds the chin, he'll be able to rock him as well. Would he be able to get the finish where others weren't? Maybe, I don't know. Again, sort of like I mentioned with Wonderboy, one of the downsides of being a high-level striker is that all the time you put in, both in fights and then also in the gym, you're taking plenty of shots along the way, and that can have effects on your chin. I'm not saying that Israel Adesanya has a bad chin, but it's not like he has a granite chin either. So there's a chance that Costa could rock him and then in a scramble be able to finish him from there. But with that being said, I would imagine that Adesanya is going to understand that coming in and be very selective in the shots he lands and just pick him apart. So I'd probably take Adesanya in that fight, and that's probably going to be the next fight that we get at middleweight. Yoel Romero, like I mentioned with Henry Cejudo, Romero is known for his freestyle wrestling, not his folk style wrestling. That's why for the most part when he takes guys down, it's not like he's dominating people on the ground. It's not like he's holding there for a while, landing a bunch of huge shots. He has had a couple fights where he's landed some good shots from top, but it's not like that's a major part of his game. So while people look at him as a great wrestler, I don't necessarily see him taking Israel down and then just dominating Israel from top. He may be able to take Israel down, but if he does, I don't know that he's going to hold him down for the entirety of the round or be able to finish him once he gets him there. If anything, Israel would probably find a way to throw up some submissions, and if he doesn't catch him, which I don't know that I'd see him catching him, he'll just be able to do enough to create a scramble and get back up. And then on the feet, Yoel's obviously very dangerous, very explosive when he goes for his shots, but I could just see Israel peppering him the whole time. When Yoel likes to sort of lay low and sort of catch his breath and pick his spots, I could see Adesanya just peppering the body and just causing some issues for Romero there. So while Romero's definitely a tough fight for him, I would probably lean Israel's way on that one. Then we have Kelvin Gastelum. We already saw that fight. Kelvin had a lot of good moments, had 2 rounds in the bag going into the 5th, but then Adesanya took it away from there. I'd probably have to take Adesanya in the rematch too. Adesanya made a lot of reads that he was able to work to build off of later on in the fight, so with the knowledge he has from the first set, I'm sure going into the second he'd have a quicker start and do much better. And if he gets in the same type of grappling exchanges, I'm sure his jiu-jitsu will be at a further along point, and he may even be able to get a finish. Not that I would expect him to finish on the ground, but he'd be better served in those positions than he was in the first fight. Then we have Jack Hermansson. Hermansson's pretty good on the ground. It could definitely cause some issues for Adesanya there. Do I think he can get the fight to the ground? I think that might be more of an issue for Jack. His takedowns, they're not bad, but I don't know that I don't see him taking Adesanya down in the middle of the cage. He may be able to pressure him up against the fence and just win a battle from the clinch there. But again, it's not easy to get a guy with Israel Adesanya's footwork to get him up against the fence. Granted, Brunson was able to do it, so at least credit to him there. But I think it was more from him shooting and then driving him forward, rather than like boxing him into a corner and then clinching up from there. So Hermansson could be a difficult matchup for him, but I would probably lean Israel's way right now. Jacare would be a tough one. Jacare, he tends to throw wide and wild strikes in the feet. Now, granted, he is at 205 now, but it's not as though he couldn't make 185 again. I think the reason to go to 205 is just that there's more opportunities to get to a title fight at 205 than there are at 185 right now. If you look at 205 and who the last two title fighters or who the last two contenders have been, they're both guys who are former middleweights and both guys who are ranked like outside of like the top 12 even at a certain point. So for a guy like Jacare, who's usually a top 5 middleweight, he's probably thinking he's not too far away from a title fight there, but I'm sure he can come back down if an opportunity presented itself. But he'd be a tough matchup for Adesanya in that he does have good takedowns, good against the fence. He can shoot for takedowns too. It's not as though he's going to like blast you off your feet in the middle of the octagon, but he can at least like shoot you into the fence and then take you down from there. So it could be an issue there. And if he does get Adesanya down, that would be a really big problem for Adesanya. I think that Jacare is one of those guys where if he gets Adesanya down, he could probably finish him within that same round. So for that reason, I would definitely count Jacare among the matchups that would be really bad for Adesanya right now. Number 8 is Chris Weidman. To me, Weidman is the worst matchup for him. The reason being is that Weidman is another one of those guys where it's not just that he's a great wrestler, but he's a great grappler too. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, excellent guard passing, very good top pressure as well. He can, and he's very good about shooting in the middle of the cage and getting a guy down. Very good at hitting that single, and then I'm trying to think of how to describe it. But he's very good at getting a single and then finishing a single in open space. But he can also wrestle against the fence too. So to me, Weidman's a guy where he's ranked number 8 right now, and a lot of people are down on him, but you have to look at the fights that he's lost. It's not even that he looked that bad in them. You look at the fight with Gegard Mousasi, he won the first round, was trying to pull off a little veteran move in the second round where the ref told him that he was kneed illegally. And so he's like, all right, well, fine, I'm kind of tired after that first round. Let me just catch my breath, use the full 5 minutes. And while he was doing that and sort of like playing up the effect of the knee that he was told was illegal, they go to review, tell him it's legal, and oh, by the way, since you've been playing it up so much, it looks like you really were rocked, so we're gonna have to call the fight. So he got done dirty there. I didn't think that was fair at all. Granted, that's a risk you take when you're trying to play the game and trying to use the full 5 minutes, but to me, it didn't feel fair that he lost the way he did. But he did have a round on Gegard Mousasi going into that point of the fight. Against Jacare, he had 2 rounds in the bag against Jacare and then gets caught and rocked. Looked like he was in a position where he could potentially beat Yoel Romero, gets caught in the 3rd round. So a lot of these fights, he starts very strong. He's definitely in there with some of the best guys. It's just he's had bad luck in the later portions of these fights. So with Adesanya, if he doesn't put Adesanya away early, is there a possibility of him having some issues later on? Definitely. But I think he has the game where if he gets Adesanya down, and he's very capable of getting him down, I could definitely see him passing guard, getting to a dominant position like Mount early on, and just being able to either pound him out or find a submission. And to me, for that reason, I think Chris Weidman is the worst matchup at middleweight for Israel Adesanya. But then we have Derek Brunson. We've already seen that fight. That didn't go very well for Derek. Ian Heinisch. I mean, he had some nice moments against Brunson, but ended up losing that fight. I don't know that I see him outstriking Adesanya or doing a whole lot there on the feet. Don't see him taking Adesanya down and beating him up. Uriah Hall would be an interesting fight just because Uriah's got very good striking, but Uriah tends to get caught fairly often, and I could see Adesanya picking him apart. Brad Tavares, we've already seen that fight. Shoeface, don't see him being able to take Adesanya down. If he is able to take him down early, he may be able to get a finish there, but he had issues like that against Uriah Hall where he took Uriah Hall down early and wasn't able to get the finish and then ended up costing him. Edmund Shabazian, it's a guy a lot of people are high on, pretty good striking, but I don't think his striking is on the same level as Adesanya. So then the question would be, can he get Adesanya down and can he control, get to dominant positions and finish from the ground? Maybe, but I feel like I haven't seen enough to make a prediction like that. And then we have Amari Akhmedov. So to me, the guy at 185 who is the toughest style matchup for Adesanya is Chris Weidman. Luckily for Adesanya, though, Chris Weidman is also moving up to 205 and sees an easier path to the title at that weight class than he does at 185. And 205, boy, I mean, I don't know that anyone really matches up well with Jon Jones at all. Jon Jones has very good striking, excellent wrestling. His jiu-jitsu is, I mean, he doesn't get put on his back very often. He does have some attacks off his back, but he tends to be a guy who's hard to hold down. But on top, he's very good about landing elbows from top. Very excellent ground and pound. Good at passing guard. Good at attacking for submissions. Not a ton of holes in his game. A lot of people looked at that fight with Thiago Santos as a fight that they thought he lost. I didn't see it that way at all. If you look at the damage, first off, if you've trained before and you've taken leg kicks before, or if you've even given leg kicks before, like you understand the effectiveness there. And to me, with all the leg kicks that Jon Jones was landing, I was like, yeah, he may not be landing as many shots to the head, but these shots to the leg are doing a ton of damage. And that was further proven when the fight ended and you realize that going into the fight, Thiago Santos had two good knees. Leaving the fight, he had 2 blown ACLs. Like, obviously there was a ton of damage being done there. And under different circumstances, Thiago might not have even continued through a 5-round fight had it not been for a title fight. But there are plenty of other guys where you tear about the ACLs, they're not making it all the way to the final bell. They're getting finished. So Jones is doing plenty of work there, and I don't see a rematch with him and Thiago Santos going any better for Santos than that one. I didn't think it was that close the first time around. Yes, there was a judge who gave it to Thiago, but I don't think the second fight around will be that close. So to me, Thiago isn't necessarily a tough matchup for him. Anthony Smith never really had a great shot at him. Dominic Reyes, I mean, it's 205. They're bigger guys. They're explosive. They can knock people out. People have seen that with they've seen it with Dominic Reyes. They saw how he finished against OSP and some of the other fights lower down in the division, but I just don't see him having a skill set that's going to cause any issues. Definitely not on the grappling and the striking. I see Jones being able to keep him at range and just being an overall better striker there. Jan Blachowicz has some punching power, but his grappling is not going to be enough to deal with Jon Jones. Jones could probably take him down and beat him up. Jones wants to keep it standing. I could see him just picking him apart from the feet. Gustafsson, we've already seen that fight again. Corey Anderson, again, I don't see Corey Anderson taking Jones down. If it stays on the feet, Jones is a much better striker than Corey Anderson is. Volkan Ozdemir is going to get taken down and beaten up. Glover Teixeira, we've already seen that fight. Johnny Walker. I feel like I haven't seen enough of Johnny Walker. I think a lot of people are excited about Walker because, like I mentioned before, this is 205. This is where you can have some athletes who are really explosive and can knock people out in impressive fashion, but I feel like I don't know enough about him technically to know what he's going to be able to do in a prolonged fight with Jon Jones on the feet. Is it possible they throw something at Jones that Jones isn't expecting and clips him and knocks him out? I guess. If you had to pick someone off of this list who has a chance of beating him, I guess that's probably where you go with it because, hey, he's got a puncher's chance or he's got a kicker's chance or kneeer's chance or whatever strike he wants to go for. Alexander Rakic, probably. I don't know that Jon Jones takes him down at will, but there's potential there. Rakic is a pretty good striker as well, but I just feel like Jones is going to be able to keep a distance with Rakic, be able to use those oblique kicks effectively, and just keep him off of him. Ilir Latifi just doesn't have the gas tank to keep up with him. I don't see that match being close. Serkinov doesn't have the chin. Nikita Krylov, don't really see much see much to believe in him. And Shogun Rua, that fight happened a long time ago, and Shogun was in a much better position to beat Jon Jones than he is now, and don't see that happening. So if I have to pick one person off of this list to beat Jon Jones at light heavyweight, like I feel like I'm stuck in a position where I've got to pick someone. I guess before I go to that, you could count Chris Weidman and Jacare in this as well. Jacare probably isn't going to be able to take Jones down, so it just ends up being a striking match, and Jones is able to win that. And then with Chris Weidman, that one's a little more interesting because Weidman is very good about finishing takedowns in open space. So if he does get in on one and he gets Jones down, there's reason to believe that he could keep Jones down for that round and at least be able to advance to some good positions. I don't know that he gets to a point where he finishes him, and we've seen some issues with Weidman where he has some gas issues where if he's working really hard to get someone down and control him, that as the rounds move along, he tends to have some problems. So I think it's possible that Weidman could steal a round on Jon Jones, but I don't see him winning a whole fight on Jon Jones. So with that being said, because I don't think that there's any fighter in the 205 class that's going to beat Jon Jones technically, they'd have to just have a puncher's chance in there. I guess the puncher that I would go with would be Johnny Walker, just because he's been able to climb his way into the top 10 without showing us too much of his game, and for that reason, he could have some tricks up his sleeve that Jon Jones isn't ready for, and maybe he catches him with something, but I would not pick Johnny Walker against Jon Jones. It's just, if I have to pick one guy out of that list, I guess Walker probably has the best chance of them, but that's not saying much. Moving on to heavyweight, the champion is Stipe Miocic. Number one contender is Daniel Cormier, a guy who beat Stipe the first time and had 3 rounds on him in the bag the second time. So I guess with that being said, Cormier's got a great case for being the toughest matchup for Stipe, but just to go down the list, from there we have Francis Ngannou. We saw that fight with Stipe. Ngannou didn't have the technical boxing to deal with Stipe. Stipe was able to outbox him for much of that first round, eventually got him down. And then once he was able to take him down, was really able to drain him out. Obviously, Francis is a guy who has just absurd power, and with that power, he can be an issue for Stipe, and he can clip Stipe in the first round and put him out. So with that being said, anytime Francis is in a fight, he's always got a great chance just because of that power. But with that being said, if I had to say who's a tougher matchup, Francis or DC, from what we've actually seen in the octagon, both have been in there for not 5 full rounds. I guess 5 full rounds for Francis, but not quite 5 full rounds for Daniel. Daniel's looked a lot better in those 5 rounds than Francis has. So I'd have to put Daniel ahead of Francis on that list. Then we have Curtis Blades. Curtis would probably just get boxed up on his feet. Just the striking disparity there would be a big issue for him. Yes, he's got good takedowns and he's getting a lot better about finishing from top, but I just don't see him being effective there. We saw Daniel Cormier, who was a better grappler or better takedown artist than Curtis Blades, have trouble getting Stipe down consistently. So I don't know that I could see Curtis doing the same, especially when Curtis's striking isn't on the same level as DC's. Granted, he's a longer fighter, but I don't see him being effective in getting Stipe to the ground. Junior Dos Santos, we've seen that fight with Stipe, didn't go well for Junior. Derek Lewis, I'd see Junior outbox him and then being able to take him down and beat him up from there. Alexander Volkov, same type of situation. I'd see Stipe being able to outbox him and then take him down, beat him up. Overeem, we've already seen. Blago Ivanov, don't see any reason to believe he'd match up particularly well with Stipe. Shamil Abdurahinov, don't see a whole lot there. Walt Harris, he's looked pretty decent in his recent fights, but again, from a style matchup, I don't know that I see him outstriking Stipe, and even if he could be close in the striking, you figure Stipe could find a way to mix in the takedowns, and either take the edge on the feet with the threat of the takedown, or just be able to take him down in general. Augusto Sakai, don't see a whole lot there. Alexei Olenek, not seeing much there. Maurice Green, Sergey Pavlovich, Marcin Tavora. So to me, Daniel Cormier is probably, among guys on this list, Daniel Cormier is the toughest matchup, but there is a guy who is not on this list right now because he has not gone through USADA, but will be going through USADA and would like to return to the octagon in April. And that guy is a guy who goes by the name of Rumble Johnson. Rumble has a very dominant win against a guy who in some ways is similar to Stipe and Ryan Bader. Bader tried to take Rumble down, got stuffed, and just beat up from there. Rumble has power that is, I don't think it's as good. I don't think his hands are as heavy as Francis Ngannou, but effectively it might as well be. Like, he gets his hands on you, he'll put you out. But on top of that, he actually has wrestling where Francis Ngannou doesn't. He started as a wrestler and has that grappling base that Francis doesn't. So in that way, if you're Stipe and you just have a boxing match with Rumble, you're going to be dealing with the kicks that you weren't having to deal with Francis, but you're also going to be dealing with incredibly heavy hands that are going to be very dangerous for him. And if you try to make it into a grappling match, do so at your own risk, because if he ends up sprawling on top of you and ends up getting in a top position, you might not get out of there until the ref pulls him off of you. So to me, while there's a great case to be made that DC is the toughest matchup because DC has won 4 out of 5 rounds against him, to me, I really think that Rumble matchup is a really bad matchup for Stipe. So I will say Rumble Johnson is the worst matchup at heavyweight for Stipe Miocic. Onto the women's divisions, we have Zhang Weili as the strawweight champion. Zhang Weili, where she's strong, for one, physically she's very strong, but she's also pretty technical in all aspects of fighting. It's not as though she's like a great striker. She's not a great wrestler. She's not a great grappler / jiu-jitsu artist. But she's definitely good in all areas, and she's generally a lot stronger than the girls she fights. That last title fight she had with Jessica Andrade was a battle between 2 girls who generally are a lot stronger than their opponents. But the difference being Zhang Weili is a lot more technical than Andrade is, and that really ended up paying off for her. While Andrade was throwing wide and wild strikes. Zhang Weili was just thrown straight down the pipe and was able to land first, and once she had Andrade rocked, it didn't take long for her to put away. So if you look at the top 15, Andrade is the next one in line. We saw that matchup didn't go well for Andrade. I don't think it would go a whole lot better for her if they had a rematch. Rose Namajunas, a lot more technical. So in that way, on the feet, it would be interesting. I'd be interested to see if Zhang tries to take that fight to the mat and how it goes from there. Rose has improved a lot since then. I think if she's not a brown belt right now, her level is at least around there. So there's a chance that if Zhang is having trouble on the feet against Rose and she tries to take her down, that there are going to be some submission threats. So with that in mind, I think Rose is a pretty tough matchup for her. It'll just depend on whether or not Rose actually wants to return to the octagon. I don't know that she does. Tatiana Suarez is interesting. I feel like she's a little bit overhyped in that there's a real lack of wrestling talent in the women's divisions compared to the men's. Obviously, with there being a lot of big Division I programs that have their wrestlers end up leaving and then going into MMA, it's not uncommon to see a very good male wrestler come into the sport and then do well. But it is uncommon to see a really good female wrestler. So having a very good female wrestler in Tatiana Suarez, a lot of people expect a lot out of her. There's a lot of comparisons to Khabib, but like I mentioned with Khabib is not just a great wrestler, he's also a great grappler. Tatiana's not a bad grappler. I think she's a purple belt in jiu-jitsu, but it's not like she's a dominant grappler either. So if she's able to get the fight to the ground, it's not like she's an immediate threat to finish, or that if she doesn't finish you, she'll be able to land a bunch of huge shots and really take a lot out of you. So if she does fight Zhang Weili, Zhang would definitely have the advantage on the feet. It'd be difficult for Tatiana to close the distance on her and get her down. And if she does get her down, and even if she's able to keep her down, I don't know that she's going to do enough damage where going into the next rounds it's going to be enough for her. Like, I feel like if Tatiana Suarez is going to fight Zhang Weili, she's probably going to have to drag this out over the course of 5 rounds. And that means she's going to have to take her down and control her for at least 3 of those rounds. Is she going to be able to get through Zhang striking and do that? I wouldn't predict that she would. So to me, I would actually pick Zhang over Tatiana Suarez. Nina Ansaroff would be interesting just because she's a pretty good striker, decent grappler. Could cause some issues for Zhang Weili. I feel like I need to see more of both of them to figure out how that matchup would go. But I'd probably have to lean Zhang's way right now. Joanna would be interesting because Joanna is difficult to take down and control. So with that being said, Zhang would have to do that, or she would be in a striking match with Joanna, and you would figure that over the course of 5 rounds that would go Joanna's way, or that would lean Joanna's way. Now, one of the downsides for Joanna is that she's more of a volume striker than a power striker, so while she'll definitely put up the numbers, it's not like she's going to knock you out or like be at risk of knocking you out at any point unless she like starts catching with a couple shots and getting you rocked off of volume. So for her, she would have to hope to win the fight over the course of 5 rounds, and that would mean not getting taken down, and that would mean not getting caught with any huge shots from Zhang, which is definitely a risk there. But there's definitely a case to be made that if Joanna, assuming that she can reliably make 115, that she could be a very difficult matchup for Zhang Weili. Claudia Gadelha would want to get the fight to the mat, but I don't see her being effective in doing that, especially over the course of 5 rounds. Michelle Waterson, probably a little too small for Zhang. The fight's mostly going to take place on the feet. I could just see Zhang landing more shots, landing more significant shots, and those adding up in the judges' eyes. Carla Esparza, similar story to what I was saying with Tatiana Suarez. Suarez is better than her, though, at that game. Suarez beat Esparza at that game when they fought. Marina Rodriguez is an interesting one because she's a very good striker. Don't know where her grappling stands, but she did fight against Tecia Torres and was able to keep Tecia off of her and didn't get taken down. So if she was able to do that against Tecia, would she be able to do that against Zhang? Maybe. And if that is the case, definitely going to be a difficult matchup for Zhang. Both of them are very good in the clinch, so stylistically, that'd be a fun fight to watch. I don't know that I would pick Marina against Zhang, but that definitely have to be up there among like the top 3 most difficult matchups for Zhang. At number 9 with Marina. Cynthia Calvillo, not a big believer in her. Alexa Grasso, don't really see her winning that match. Felice, don't see her winning. Tecia Torres already lost to Zhang Weili. And then Kovalevich and Courtney Casey, don't really see much there. So to me, the most difficult matchups you're looking at would probably be Rose Namajunas, Joanna, and Marina Rodriguez. Who would be the toughest among them? I would say Rose Namajunas, just because if the fight does go to the ground, she would be the best prepared to handle herself from there. So I'll say Rose Namajunas would be the toughest matchup for Zhang Weili. For Valentina Shevchenko, I mean, I guess I have to do this, but this one might be even tougher than the Jon Jones one, because at least with Jon Jones, you're at 205. You're talking about 205-pound men, so they at least like have that puncher's chance. I don't know that there's anyone in this division who's effectively got the puncher's chance, where if they land one big shot, they're going to put Valentina away. So you're looking at Caitlin Chukagian. I don't see her winning this fight on the feet. Definitely don't see her taking Valentina down and dominating from there. Jessica Eye just got nearly murdered the last time they fought. Joanne Calderwood, decent striking, not better than Valentina though. And with her being a top contender, you'd figure she'd be calling out Valentina if she was confident in her ability to win that fight. She seems to be doing anything but. Liz Carmouche, we just saw that fight. Pretty bad fight. Jennifer Maia, I don't see her being able to get the fight to the ground and being effective there. Viviana Araujo, Andrea Lee, Lauren Murphy, Roxanne Modafferi, Alexis Davis, Montana De La Rosa, Macy Barber, Mara Romero Barella, Antonina Shevchenko, and Jillian Robertson, and the rest of them. Don't know that any matchup that well. I know Macy Barber has a lot of people interested. I think a lot of interest in Macy Barber is more based around what she says than what she actually does in the cage. I believe in her last fight she fought J.J. Aldrich, was looking pretty bad in that fight until she ended up catching her later on. People tend to assume just because you're young and you have decent skills that, hey, if you got this far by age 20, imagine how far you'll get by age 25. There's a lot that gets in the way of that. Generally, it's a lot easier to make up early ground than it is to make up late ground, as to say how much better you'll get in, let's just say you're training jiu-jitsu, for example. The amount of improvements you'll make from knowing nothing at white belt to getting to your blue belt, there's a ton. Like the amount of positional understanding, the amount of new moves you're going to have in your repertoire. So over the course of 2 years, you're going to add a lot. Over the next 2 years, even if you get to purple, like you're probably not going to add as much to your repertoire in those 2 years as you did in your first two. And then years 4 to 6, you're probably going to add a little less. 6 to 8, you'll add a little less. So it's not as though like it's fair to assume that Macy Barber is just going to be like a black belt level striker, black belt level wrestler, black belt level grappler in a couple of years from now. And I think people tend to make that assumption with her. But what she is right now, she's strong. She's a physically strong girl for the weight class. She has some power, but it's not as though her jiu-jitsu is overly impressive. It's not like she's got fantastic guard passing, fantastic control from dominant positions. It's not like her striking is super tight. So, maybe somewhere down the line she may be successful, but I feel like a lot of the hype around her is because she actually has the cojones to go out and say, hey, I'm going to be a young champion. I'm going to be a champion. I'm going to be great. And I appreciate that about her. One of the things I hate a lot in sports is when people will refuse to say anything that sounds self-confident because for some reason they're afraid if they lose it, they'll have to answer to people, which first off, you really don't have to answer to people. You can just not log on Twitter after you lose, or you can just give a short answer if a media member asks you about it in a press conference. But even still, like, the downside of saying, hey, I'm going to win or I'm going to do something great and not doing it doesn't make up for the upside of saying you're going to do it and then doing it. Because when you say you're going to do something and you do it, that resonates with people a lot more than hearing someone say they're going to win and they end up losing. Like, people, they'll forget about that relatively quickly. Like, can you think of the last time a pro athlete said that they were going to win a big series and they end up losing it? You probably can't. But you can remember when Marc Messier said that he was going to come back against the Devils, came back and won, had a hat trick, and then went on to win the Stanley Cup. Like, to me, if you're any kind of athlete, but especially a fighter, where being able to sell, being marketable yourself is really going to be a big driver in how much money you can make. I like an athlete who actually goes out there and is confident and is willing to say, hey, I'm going to win this fight, or I'm going to do something great. So on that end, I don't hold it against Macy Barber for being as confident and outspoken as she is. It's just from what I've seen in the cage, I don't have reason to believe that her plan of becoming the youngest UFC champion is something that's going to come into fruition, especially in a weight class where Valentina Shevchenko is at the top. And then on to the final champion, it's Amanda Nunes. She is the champion both at 135 and 145. 145 really doesn't have a division. It's basically Felicia Spencer and Megan Anderson. Megan Anderson probably doesn't win that fight on the feet, although I guess she's got somewhat of a puncher's chance there. If the fight goes anywhere near the mat, though, she's screwed. Don't let the fact that she just won a match by guillotine choke or by triangle choke change that for you. It was a pretty sloppy triangle, but her opponent didn't really seem to know what she was doing on the ground either. So with Amanda being a black belt in judo and a black belt in jiu-jitsu, if she was having any issues on the feet, which I don't think she would, she could probably take that fight to the mat pretty easily and get the finish from there. That said, it's not as though Amanda is known for having a great wrestling shot or great at like shooting in open space, but I'm sure she'd find a way to get that fight to the mat if she had to. Felicia Spencer had a lot of hype behind her after that win over Megan Anderson. Then we saw her fight Cyborg, who in some ways is similar to Amanda Nunes' style, and Cyborg just boxed her up because Felicia, though she has good jiu-jitsu, doesn't have very good boxing. And if she were to fight Nunes, I don't see her being able to take Nunes down. And for as much as that fight lasts on the feet, it's just not going to go well for her. So if I have to play along with this game and say who matches up best with Nunes at 145, I'd have to pick between Anderson and Spencer. The fights start on the feet, so I guess you got to go with the better striker, the guy or the person who's at least going to be more dangerous on the feet. So I guess Megan Anderson would be the toughest matchup at 45, but that's not to say she's a tough matchup. It's just between her and Spencer, I guess she's the tougher of the two for Nunes, but definitely would not pick her over Amanda Nunes. And then at bantamweight, the number one contender is Jermaine Durandamy. This is a fight that's already happened, and Nunes already won it. Durandamy is a very good striker, though, so like we mentioned, fights all start on the feet. If Durandamy has been training a lot of takedown defense since that first fight, maybe it'll be more difficult for her to get taken down, and if it just stays on the feet, I still think Nunes probably has the edge there, but if this just stays a kickboxing match, Durandamy is dangerous from there and does have a puncher's chance. So she could be a tough matchup. Ketlin Vieira, pretty decent all around. I don't see her winning this fight on the feet, though, and I don't see her being able to take Nunes down and control her. So for that reason, I wouldn't pick her against Nunes, or I wouldn't say that she's a terribly hard matchup. Holly Holm, we just saw that fight. You would think on paper that Holly being a great counter striker would be a tough matchup for Nunes, but didn't end up working that way at all. Holm was very hesitant to throw punches and ended up getting knocked out with a head kick. Aspen Ladd just had a loss to Durandamy. Potentially could be an issue. She might. I guess Ladd might be one of those people who are down the line, and it's not just a question of Spencer and Anderson. It'd be Spencer, Ladd, and Anderson. So maybe throw her into that conversation, but I don't know that I see a whole lot from her to believe that she's going to knock off Nunes at bantamweight. Juliana Pena may have an advantage on the mat if the fight goes there, although I think Pena might be a brown belt, whereas Nunes is a black belt, but there are different skill sets that you can have. I think Pena's grappling is her jiu-jitsu is a little better suited for MMA than Nunes is. Nunes is a very good top game. I don't know that Nunes is going to be quite as good off her back, so if Pena is able to take her down, she may be effective from there, but if it's a 5-round fight, you're going to have to do that multiple times. You're going to have to be able to get a finish. I don't see her getting a finish from top, so she'd have to do that multiple times. I don't see her doing that, so I don't see her being a terrible matchup for Amanda Nunes. Rocco Pennington, very bad fight for Pennington. We already saw how that went. Kuniskai, I don't see much there. Aldana, don't really see her being a terrible matchup for Nunes. Marion Renault would want to bring this fight to the mat. Don't see her being able to. Sarah McMahon already fought Nunes. Wasn't able to bring that fight to the mat or be able to control from there. Lena Landsberg, I mean, decent striking, but I don't see her beating Amanda Nunes. Yes, she has a striker's chance, but would not pick her there. And then we have a few more girls on the bottom. We have Betch Correa, the Betch effect. God, that'd be so funny if Betch got the title fight and then won it and then twerked. But as great as that moment would be, it's just not a moment that's going to happen, unfortunately. Her hands aren't heavy enough. She's not going to put Amanda away, and she's going to take a lot of heavy shots and probably get knocked out herself. Nika Montano, just don't see a whole lot from her. I mean, decent grappling, strong girl for 125, but I don't see her being effective in closing the distance or taking down Amanda Nunes. And then Sijara Eubanks coming off a loss to Betch. Decent grappler in her own right, very good jiu-jitsu player, but wasn't able to take down and control Betch Correa. I don't see her taking down and controlling Amanda Nunes. So if we're picking someone off of this list, I guess you got to go with the girl she's fighting next on December 14th, and that's Jermaine Durandamy. But I don't know that there's anyone up and coming right now that's going to give her big problems. So looks like Amanda Nunes is going to be able to hold both titles, both at 35 and 45, for as long as she's willing to defend them. But that covers it for this week, or for this episode. So there it is through all your divisions. This might be a fun concept to come back to maybe every year or every other year when we actually do see some of these guys get knocked off. Maybe go back and look at this in a few months from now and see some of these matchups play out and see if I was right about some, wrong about some. So that'll be interesting. But that'll be all for this episode. Like I mentioned before, there will be a normal episode coming out later on. Tough to say when, whether it'll be like Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, but I will be doing the normal episode where I'm recapping the UFC Tampa card and then previewing the UFC Boston card. So we'll talk about that later. There's some other topics to talk about as well there. I think I'm also going to be talking about China with the whole issue that's going on with the NBA, looking at the UFC angle of that and discussing whether or not I think the UFC should continue to do business out there and continue to pursue business out there. So that covers it.